Chef Nakia, and I made my own desserts and half of the cocktail hour food for my own wedding. And here's how it went. If you've been following along, you know that I already posted a planning video and a end of planning, beginning of execution video about preparing some food for my wedding. And so if you missed those, a little bit of context is I got married at the end of September. So yes, it's been a little while. And I wanted to make all of the desserts and most of the cocktail hour food for our wedding. We had a caterer cook the main meal, and as we got closer to the event date, he did say that for them it would be better if a couple of the dishes they could bring out during cocktail hour instead of serving everything at the same time during dinner. So that's why we ended up half cocktail hour food was on me, half of the cocktail hour food was on them. The venue we used did not have an on-site kitchen, no refrigerator space, no sinks. I mean, they had running water. It was plumbed, but there wasn't like, you know, a real sink there. So our chef caterer set up a temporary kitchen on site for our event, and then for desserts and cocktail hour food, I had to make sure that everything that we brought was completely prepared ahead of time. There was no prep space and there was no refrigerator to keep things in until they were served. So that is just some of the context if you haven't seen those other videos, so that you kind of understand where I'm coming from in this video. And today this video is going to be a reaction video to making the decision to DIY a good portion of our wedding food. I am going to talk you through what we actually did and how it actually turned out, and if I regret it or not. And if I could go back in time, what would I do differently, and would I even do it? And a little reminder, I am an expert in food. I am not an expert in weddings. I do not typically work weddings. I am not like a wedding caterer. However, I have, in my experience as a chef, I have been a part of large events and cooked food for large groups of people. So while I don't do wedding catering, I do have some experience in what the food needs for an event type scenario. But really my expertise here definitely lies in the food aspect of it, not the wedding aspect. And in my retrospection of it, it's very clear that my expertise does not lie in the wedding part. So if you watched the most recent video about wedding DIY food, I did go through those last planning and beginning execution steps. I kind of graded myself on how well I did or did not do, and gave you a few tips of, if I could go back and redo it, knowing what I know now, what might I have done a little bit differently. So I will try not to repeat myself too much. I'm going to take this at a little bit more of like a macro viewpoint of it, and if you want a little bit more detailed feedback, that second video may have a little bit more of what you are looking for. Overall, there was one thing that I really was not prepared for. I had no idea that this was going to have the implications that it had, and so I was just not well planned or prepared for it. And that was the fact that we were up at the town where we got married. We were there for 4 days. So our wedding was on Thursday. We got there on Tuesday. So we had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And throughout that time, a lot of our wedding guests were there for a good amount of that time also, which was super awesome. I highly recommend that if you have a lot of people traveling from out of town or out of state for a big event like this, we like stretch it out as far as possible. Tuesday we had a welcome party. Wednesday we had our rehearsal. Wednesday morning was rehearsal at the venue, so that was a pretty small group of people, but then we went back to one of the VRBOs. We had 2 VRBOs for close family and friends to stay in with us. So we had the rehearsal brunch, so a lot of people would do like a rehearsal dinner, but it made more sense for us to do it as a brunch, so we did that at one of the VRBOs. And so of course that was like a bit larger group, more family was able to join us, and that was wonderful. And then after that we had a pickleball tournament. After that, like later on that evening, we did a game night, and then the wedding day is the wedding day. And then Friday we went horseback riding with some family, and then after that we did the newlywed game, which is like a little family tradition that my side of the family has done for over a decade now. And so it was so nice to be able to like host so many people so often. But one thing that we didn't really think about until we were in the middle of it was, oh my goodness, we signed up to host 5 parties in 4 days. And y'all, I am an introvert. I love talking to my cats and my husband, and like, I love talking to people, but you know, very much shorter quantities and like much more one-on-one. I did not know how to plan for so many larger social gatherings, and I was unintentionally but kind of forced to be somewhat the center of multiple people's attention in multiple of these events. I loved the amount of time that I got to spend with people. It drained my social battery so quickly, which ended up making everything else that week very exhausting. So the events that we hosted, a lot of those, I made all of the food for them. So the rehearsal brunch, I did crepes and breakfast burritos. And the nice thing is, a lot of these things I was able to fully prep ahead of time. But there is still that, you know, pulling stuff out of the fridge, setting stuff up, maybe reheating things. So there's always some aspect of hands-on, you know, work that does need to be done. And then the day of the wedding, I wanted to make sure that lunch was like super easily accessible, because I knew that throughout the day I would be busy, and I really wanted to have a good solid meal before all of the other festivities began. So I prepped pork for like little street tacos, a couple toppings, nothing crazy, nothing fancy, nothing wild. And again, I prepped it all ahead of time, so that day for lunch, other people could just, you know, put the pork in the oven and heat it up, like reheat it, and pull the stuff out of the fridge and set it out for people to build their own tacos. When I made the tortillas for the breakfast burritos, I made a bunch more for the lunch. So all of those were like frozen, ready to go weeks before the wedding. The implications that this created, though, that I was not prepared for, was the fact that this is all extra food that needs to be transported from home to the town that we were getting married in. It was like 4 hours away. Also, that requires more fridge and freezer space. And because I'm this extra, I also wanted to make sure that all of the people staying in the VRBOs with us had some food available for them as if they were at home. So I stocked both of the VRBOs, like cereal and oatmeal and fruit for breakfast, some Greek yogurt, and snacks, a lot of snacks. And then I wanted to make a couple big garden salads that were just easy to, eat from no matter what. I got some bacon and you know, eggs, coffee, and whatever people like to put in coffee, whether it's half and half or creamer or whatever. Just, I really went overboard in stocking both of these houses with food for like 50 people for 4 days, and it was probably too much, and it was probably more than what I really needed to do, but it brought me a lot of joy. When I was thinking and planning for the wedding day food, I didn't think about all of this other food too. So what ended up happening is I had to spend a lot more mental energy like that week or two before the wedding, focusing on getting this stuff ready, and I overwhelmed myself and ended up not putting quite as much time into that last minute planning of the wedding day food. Looking back, in hindsight, I probably could have cooled it a bit on just how much I stocked the other VRBOs. Also, in knowing just like the volume of food that I didn't realize the volume until it was all like in front of me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have a lot of stuff here. But being a little bit more on top of that, I could have had a better plan for this, which would have opened up more of my mental capacity for the wedding day food. Now, the majority of the wedding day food, I was able to prepare and freeze ahead of time. So once it got closer to the day, it was really just transporting it from place to place. But my brain was kind of maxed out. And then there's all of the other wedding stuff that you don't know you need to deal with until it's right in front of you and you need to deal with it. So I was also not prepared for that. So if DIYing your own wedding food is something that you are thinking about for an upcoming event, I cannot overemphasize how draining and exhausting the days around the wedding are. Everybody's situation is going to be different, absolutely, but think about one of the times in your life when you've been extremely exhausted and felt pretty overwhelmed. Put yourself in that mindset and then think through some of these last minute DIY things and think, okay, in this setting, how much extra help can I get based off of being exhausted? Like from maybe 3 days before we left home, so about a week. Okay, so let's say, so we got married on Thursday, we had parties until Friday, so let's say the Friday before the wedding. From that day on, time did not feel linear. It did not feel like time as I'm used to it. Like, I feel like 2 hours would go by in the blink of an eye, just trying to get everything packed up and thinking through everything. And, you know, the mental load of thinking through these complex assumptions about how the day or days are going to look, and then really thinking through all of these different details and moving parts and pieces and people, it can be draining. It definitely can be draining. So I was not firing on all cylinders by any means by that Tuesday whenever we drove up to the town where we got married. And so looking back, I imagined that once we got to where we were going and we got settled in the VRBOs, I was going to feel like I had plenty of time in between events to do a couple of these little last minute prep things, like, for example, assembling the skewers for cocktail hour food. So that downtime I thought I would have disappeared very quickly. And I could have had a better list of exactly what activities needed to be done while we were up there, like the day before the wedding, exactly what last minute prep I needed to do. I didn't have a super clear list, which made it more difficult to delegate those things to other people when they asked, hey, what else can I do to help you? Which is super nice and kind for people to ask me, and I just never had the best answers. Okay, and as I had mentioned, I stocked these at VRBOs with food that people could just eat at their leisure whenever, but I didn't label them very clearly. So some people didn't know what they could or could not eat in the fridge, because they thought, oh, they might be needing this for the rehearsal brunch the next day or the newlywed game on Friday. So they were afraid to eat food that had a plan for it. So what I would have done is I would have used different color tapes, and I would have written on that tape. So for example, I would have used like blue tape on anything that I wanted people to eat at any time that they wanted it. And then I would have put pink tape on everything that was going to the wedding specifically. And there were some, like I did some labeling, I just didn't label every single thing. And so if something didn't have a label, people just weren't sure what to do. So what actually happened during these multiple days? Well, on Tuesday was loading up the cars and the U-Haul trailer that we last minute had to rent with the coolers of food along with all of our other decor. So I did do a good job that day. I will be kind to myself. I did a good job that day of labeling each cooler and grouping the food in ways that made a lot of sense. So like all of the desserts, wedding desserts, I could put in a cooler and I labeled that. And then all of the rehearsal brunch food, I put in a cooler, labeled that. Then we drove up there and unloaded. We filled the freezer in VRBO 1 with desserts and ran out of space. So we had to take the rest of the desserts over to VRBO 2 and put those in that freezer, which was totally fine, except because it was one of those last minute things that happened that I didn't know to plan for. I didn't have very clear communication on the day of the wedding that some of the desserts were, right, they were kind of like a stray dog, right? Most of the dogs are in the kennel at VRBO 1, and there's some of these over here in a different VRBO. So there was a little bit of last minute, oh, will you please take those from that VRBO, put it in a cooler, and then take them to the venue. But instead of them going to the venue, they actually came to the VRBO where all of the other desserts were, which is totally fine, except then nobody at that VRBO was aware that there was one more cooler that needed to be packed. So those desserts actually just spent the wedding in the living room instead of ever going to the venue. And it was totally fine because we just took them to the newlywed game the next day and they were enjoyed then. So really not much of a problem, but just one of the, during the reception, just looking at the desserts, like, oh, where are the tiramisu dessert cups? Like, I know we brought them, where did they go? So there's just that, moment of what in the world could have happened to them? And turns out that's what happened. So if you want to avoid just accidentally leaving stuff behind, labeling coolers well, having a more openly visible plan of exactly all of the items that needed to go from which VRBO to the venue would have been so much more helpful for the people who were helping us. Because then they could have check marked off like, okay, yes, we have the peach and raspberry cups. We have here, okay, we have the tiramisu cups here. Now let's get those in the car. And they wouldn't have just gone missing. Pseudo missing. Another thing that we missed was lemonade. So I made some fresh lemonade the morning of the wedding. And again, because I didn't have it labeled and I didn't think to tell anybody super clearly and have like a nice list, the lemonade just got forgotten altogether because it was in the fridge and nobody realized like, oh yeah, that's lemonade meant for the wedding. They just thought, oh, it's lemonade for anybody to drink at any time. So not that big of a deal, but yes, we got to the wedding and the bartenders were like, hey, you said there's lemonade. We don't see it anywhere. We can't find it anywhere. And so they spent a little bit more time than they needed to, looking for something that just wasn't even there. It never left the fridge. And then cocktail hour food. So the skewers, I was assembling the night of the game night, so the night before the wedding, because I wanted them to be pretty fresh. And it was, okay, again, it was this like, there's not quite as much time in between events as what I thought there would be. So I didn't quite plan, you know, enough downtime to then be like, okay, now let's start prepping these. So I was still working on them whenever people were arriving for game night, which to me was totally fine, because I like whenever I can be doing a simple task with food over here and I don't feel like I need to be completely engaged in conversation with people the whole time. Other people have different expectations of the person, one of the two people who's like hosting this event. So I get it, I understand it. But I would have been so happy just standing there finishing those skewers and taking kind of that moment like to myself to just be calm and solitary. But instead I kind of got kicked out. Other people took on the task, grateful for their help. And I think it's also just that I never was, in my brain, I wasn't able to like totally complete that circle of preparing the cocktail hour skewers. And so there was no like closure in my brain. So I felt a little frazzled about that aspect of cocktail hour food. The other cocktail hour food items we had was a pickle bar. And so I made pickled green beans and carrots, which are so good. We even still have a few that I'm snacking on. And then we also bought some pickles from local companies. So we had a few different, we had like a spicy okra and then a couple other really delicious pickles. So that was fun to have a pickle bar and then those skewers. And then the last thing I did was a pão de queijo, just like Brazilian cheese bread, which is super delicious, but it doesn't have the longest shelf life necessarily. And I made the mistake of, well, I just made the mistake of wanting to do something more. In hindsight, when I realized, oh, we don't really have like a bread-y type option, what I should have gone with was the most simple option, which would have been an assortment of beautiful crackers from the store. And instead I said, oh, let me just make a quick, easy bread, which is pão de queijo, but then I needed to freeze it to make sure it would last, and it did not do so well through freeze thaw. So I would have definitely swapped that out. I would have gone the way more simple path. I just never, ever think in like terms, like with food, that simple. So yes, definitely kicking myself for that one. But overall, it really did go well. Like the day felt pretty damn smooth. One thing that helped a lot was that my husband, his best man, and his stepdad, like my husband's stepdad, they all helped load the desserts and other food from the fridge and freezer into coolers, into cars to get to the venue. This happened right after lunch and right before my husband and I went to start taking our like portrait photos with our photographer. So let me back up a moment and just give you a little glimpse at our timeline. In the morning, we woke up and we went to get coffee and bagel sandwiches, and then we went to the venue and helped start setting up. I left earlier to head back to the VRBO, and I started making iced tea, and I took a shower, and then I started doing my hair and makeup. And then it was when I was doing my makeup that then my husband left the venue, and I think he said it was pretty much all set up by that point, and our day of coordinator had arrived, so we were like, everything's going to be good, we know that. So like decor wise, everything was set up by then. This was probably around 11 a.m. or so. So he came back to the VRBO, and I'm not exactly sure what he was doing, but I don't know, he was doing whatever. I was curling my hair. I was like stuck in the bathroom curling my hair, doing my thing. And then he was like, hey, do we have a plan for getting the food into the cars? And I said, yes, I believe that we discussed this a few times. However, it's your job. Is that okay for me to say right now? Like, do you have time? And so that's when he was like, oh yeah, that's right. I'll get on it. I'll make sure it happens. So he had his stepdad and his best man help out a bunch there, get stuff in, because then he was like, I need to get in the shower. Like, we're running out of time. So this was probably around 12:30 or so. So other people were arriving to eat that lunch that I talked about that to me was so important to have just ready. I ate lunch as I was still finishing up my hair and stuff. It always takes longer than you think it is to get ready, right? And we needed to be at the venue to meet our photographer around 2:15. So at like 1:45, I was putting my dress on and he was getting his suit finished up. And this is part of the reason why I think a couple of those last minute food items were missed, because I didn't have time to like look through the car or look through the cooler and make sure that everything was there, or even just like look through the fridge or freezer and see like, is there anything in here that needs to be gone, because we needed to get out of there. So we drove the car over to the venue and then met with our photographer, and then we went off and took pictures. Meanwhile, the best man brought the food over, unloaded the food there. At this time, our bartenders had arrived. And the nice thing about our bar situation is that we hired professional bartenders, but they aren't professional wedding bartenders. They're my friends. They are coworkers, friends from past jobs. So they, like I said, they are professional bartenders. They know what they're doing. But because this was a one-off thing, it worked out so well, and they wanted to, or like they were willing to help us outside of just pouring drinks. I think if we had hired a professional bartending service, they would have had more boundaries about what they were or were not willing to help us execute. But because these were my friends, and whenever I asked them if they would be willing to bartend our wedding, I asked, on top of bartending, would you also be comfortable helping us to display all of our cocktail hour food, desserts, and all of these extra things like non-alcoholic beverage and things that we're going to bring along. So there were two bartenders, so it was super duper helpful. Trish and Jay were awesome, and they helped unload the food, get it where it needed to go. And during the ceremony, they were setting the cocktail hour food up on the cocktail hour food table for us. So having them available to help us I think that is one of the biggest reasons why the whole day went so smoothly. So if you don't have friends who are bartenders who are going to be your bartenders also, of course you could hire a person like just to handle the food for you. Because even if you do have a catering team, they probably aren't going to want to take on the extra responsibility of setting up your food too. You could ask them and you could see, but it could be difficult. And you can totally see if friends or family would be available to help you, for free out of the kindness of their heart. You just have to make sure that those friends and family are not needed somewhere. So for example, if we had asked my sister to display the food, well, she needed to be, before the ceremony even started, she needed to be taking pictures with us ahead of time, and then, lining up for the ceremony, and then being in the ceremony, all of that stuff. It's going to be kind of hard to find a friend or family member who isn't going to have some type of responsibilities throughout that day, so that their top priority, it's someone who you want their top priority to be getting the food where it needs to go while you yourself are like getting married. So that's why I recommend hiring somebody, because once you've hired somebody, then yes, that can be their top priority. But if you have like an aunt or a cousin who's helping you out, they're gonna want to be enjoying the wedding too. And then at the end of the night, the cleanup. It was really nice, again, to have Trish and Jay, our bartenders, helping also with the, food cleanup. Our day coordinator also helped us some We did have leftovers, but because we were doing the Newlywed Game the next day, it was nice to be able to eat even more of those leftovers. I will say, sadly, we did throw away a fair amount of the pie bars that I made. They just, they weren't the most popular. There was some food waste, and that is something, again, that I wonder if I could have prevented a little bit better if maybe I had planned to have those pie bars out at events before the wedding. But you can only do so much. Almost all of the cake jars were eaten, and then a lot of the cookies were eaten too. And we had the cookies out like the whole time, in the VRBOs, the whole few days that we were there. So with the cleanup, we wanted to make sure that anything left over was handled well enough so that people could eat it the next day too. So we wanted to make sure it got in a cooler and then back to a VRBO and back in a freezer or a refrigerator, so that this food wasn't sitting out in the temperature danger zone for a very long time. And, you know, make sure everything was wrapped well, didn't get smushed too much, those kinds of things. So our bartenders and day of coordinator helped a ton in that, you know, cleaning stuff up. Another little tidbit is I didn't have like a sanitizer bucket and sanitizer water for our bartenders. And so a couple days beforehand, we were able to get with our caterer, and I just asked him like, hey, will you please bring an extra Sani bucket for our bartenders? I brought a couple rags that I have, like kitchen towels, for them to use. So that like went really smoothly and easily. It was nice that I didn't have to worry about providing the Sani water. Our caterer just helped us out with that. So if you are doing a little bit more of a DIY food bar setup, think about the sanitizing situation that you have to make sure that, you know, their health, food safety is taken care of. So if there had been a spill or something, then our bartenders had the Sani water and the rag there to appropriately clean it up. If there was anything that was going to hold food that wasn't clean, I mean, I made sure that everything was clean, but if somehow something got dirty, if something was accidentally dropped on the ground, like a platter, you pick it back up, you can at least wipe it down with a Sani rag, let it dry, and then put the food on it. So you really want to make sure that you have that bucket of Sani water just in case. Okay, I think I've covered about everything that, looking in hindsight, I would have done differently. I hope that I gave you a pretty realistic walk through what this actually looked like. And again, if you are planning to do this for yourself, are these things, are the potential complications, are the actual complications? Are these things that you are willing to plan for and prepare for and you know, work around, or is this all feeling like a little bit too much? And I hope this gives you a realistic look at what doing your own DIY wedding food might be. Now this is my situation, right? This isn't yours. Of course, everybody's gonna have some nuance based on the venue and the location of the venue, from, you know, where you live, the type of transportation options you have on hand, and like just your skill set and how much you enjoy planning, and the people who you have around you who can help you execute this too. Everyone's situation is different, but I hope this gives you a realistic, sometimes a slightly painfully realistic view into what it looks like to do your own DIY wedding food. I would absolutely do my own DIY wedding food again. Like, if I could go back in time, I would change a few ways about how I planned things, and I would try to have a little bit more perspective on just how exhausted and mentally capped out I was going to be. It is hard though to know until you're in the moment what it's going to feel like. But I would have, you know, maybe done a few things a little bit differently, but I absolutely do not regret it. Our guests were, complimenting the food. They loved it. People loved the fact that I had made it, and they're like, oh my gosh, we're eating Chef Nakia's, cake or cookies or pickled carrots or whatever the thing was that they were enjoying. But it made our guests feel like very cared for, and I truly did have a lot of fun doing it. It definitely saved us a good amount of money. And it's just really fun to be eating some of these leftovers and like, oh, this is from our wedding, like this is special. We had this food for multiple events over 4 days. To me, it's difficult to host people without feeding them. Like, to me, food is such a clear opportunity to bring people who you love together. So, to me, the backdrop of food for time together is very meaningful. And so we were able to have 4 days with people who we love so much around food. Of course, it was around more than just the food, but to me, it felt really nice to have all of that food available. I think it just really set up a beautiful 4 days together. So what do you think? Do you think you will ever DIY your own wedding food or food for a large event? And do you have any questions about anything I did? Is there anything that you're confused about, or do you feel like you need more details on? I feel like I really went into the weeds a lot on the details, but if there's anything else that you want to know, I would be happy to elaborate. And subscribe, follow along for more meal planning, meal prepping, and meal execution tips just in your normal everyday life in general. This is probably going to be the last wedding themed video that I do, but if cooking in general is of interest to you, that is what I typically talk about here on my channel. So subscribe, follow along. I think we did it. This is a very long video. And I was pretty much just talking about the food part of the wedding. Yeah, you can see how it all gets quite overwhelming pretty quickly. But I do not regret at all doing the food or, the other DIYs that we did for our wedding. It was a really, really lovely day, a lovely week, and I had so much fun. My husband and I did have a ton of fun, even like planning it, and then the day of course, we had a ton of fun. And it was just a really, really lovely time. So if you are thinking about DIYing food for your own wedding, I say go for it, do it, but put a lot of time and thought into planning, preparing, and then the execution of it, and absolutely bring all of the people in to help you. Even if you just have people there as like backup for when it gets to the day of and you're like, oh, I don't have time to do that thing. So you just have an easy backup person to come in and help you. Do your own DIY food, but definitely reach out and have other people along to help you with it, because it can never hurt to have a bigger team, right? All right, Chefeteers, thank you so much, and we will talk again soon.